What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. It's been a while since you guys, since we kind of came together as a Chit Chat, not duo, trio here, or threesome here. And I'm super excited.
Wow, let's get it going, boys.
I went
Yes.
there. So, guys, welcome back to, again, the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. We have a Chit Chat series today. And as you guys know, Chit Chat series are led and hosted by myself and then Dezi Abeyta and Antonio Castillo. So, welcome back, guys. What's going on? How's life?
Life is good, man. Life is good. I know you're getting geared up for something really important. I love you.
Let's leave that for later because I'll bust some balls a little bit later with you.
You son of a
Yeah, we'll leave it. I have plenty in the tank to go about that, but
God.
just maybe kind of entertain the audience a little bit more about what just some of the things that you got going on, professionally, as far as like nutritional help, all those different things too that you got going on. The last time we were together, we talked about Antonio just had a baby, baby Amaya, and we talked about some kind of strategies for dads and other different things like that. But what's going on? What's new here in your lives as far as nutrition, health, anything worth sharing and worth noting, any wins or anything like that you guys wanted to share?
Yeah, man, I'll start it off. Since we last spoke, I got Men's Health reached out to me back in September to write a book. It was the first one that I've ever written, and it was definitely a bucket list item for me that I always wanted to do. So that actually just got released in February. It's been really cool, man. Yeah, thanks. It's been really cool, especially on Facebook, where most of the people that I connect with on there are friends, community members. And so the amount of support and amount of people that purchased the book, reviewed it, has been really cool. I got the rough draft in January, and they're like, hey, how does it look? Everything looks really great. And then I didn't hear back. So I figured it got pushed. So until a couple of readers reached out to me, I was like, holy crap, it's been released. So I went on Amazon and was pleased to see 4.5 stars thus far. So I was like, all right, people don't hate it. So
that's a good way to reframe that. I love it, dude.
So that was really exciting, man. I think being able to write my first book, it taught me a lot about the creative process. There are a lot of things that I wanted to add in there. But it was a cool collaborative
I just
effort,
bought
man.
it.
Yeah. It was a cool collaborative effort, dude. I had our strength conditioning coach kind of consult on it. That's in my program. My sister, who just got into her dietetic internship.
How long you been writing this, dude?
Honestly, it started in September. So it was more or less almost a three-month process. And it honestly started with just hey, can you develop a meal plan? And then it expanded into, are there things that you want to talk about more? So I was like, mindset, obviously activity, non-exercise activity. So I got to dive into a lot of that, which was really cool, man.
So it turned into a small project, turned into a big one, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it definitely did. And then because of that, I got to hop on the advisory panel for Men's Health. And then I got myself
awesome, man.
A one-pager on there starting next month. So yeah, man, things are moving. We're ready to turn 5 in April. So things are good, man.
That's exciting.
Really
man.
good.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the book because I definitely would love to kind of hear a little more about some of the stuff you put on there. I literally just bought it. So
nice.
Yeah, dude, I'll definitely leave that 1.5 star review there whenever I get it.
He doesn't hate it. He kind of likes it.
Kind of like it.
Likes it.
Oh,
He's
man, that's awesome. What's new with you, Tony? What's going on, dude?
Life is amazing. Maya's about to be 7 months. We just started feeding her actual food. And talk about a different journey. We take so many things for granted, being in the space that we're in, being dietitians, being male dietitians. And one thing that we push a lot with our clients is definitely increasing protein to meet their needs to keep on muscle mass. So we have products that are higher protein products. Now, those products we can't give to Amaya because she's a baby. Her kidneys are still growing, so she can't process that amount of protein. So having to recreate things that I typically don't eat, let's say just regular pancakes, because I typically have a higher protein pancake just because it's easier to make. The mix is already made and we just throw the egg in, throw the milk in, and we're good to go. But with her, it's something different, right? Because she can't have that. And also watching things high in salt because she has to process those things. So we cook the same foods, but it's separately cooked, I guess the best way to put it. So for example, we cooked, she loves filet. bro, I better have a good lifespan with this job because she likes to eat expensive food.
She has, yeah.
Bougie baby, dude.
It's coming from like a very expensive whiskey, like, you know, like fan here, like, you know, that literally kind of gave me like a $500 glass one day. You know,
Here, try this out.
It makes sense.
So like she just was like gnawing on the filet, but we couldn't cook it like, let's say if we want to cook it in butter or add salt, we couldn't. So it was in a separate pan, but she still got the same foods as us. So having her experience these new foods and see these new foods, it's so cool because we never got to go through that because we don't remember the first foods we ate. Right. I remember
so
my mom.
How are you learning this process? Because I know there's like this whole concept about baby-led weaning or whatever it's called, like, and like and those kind of things like that. So I think even for like some of like the moms or dads listening to this now that we kind of have a big audience, mixed audience here. So like, what's that process? Because I know everybody has different mentalities, and I don't know how you went through this process too, Dezi, when with Rory. But like, what's that like? Did you just like learn about it, read books about it, like consulted with dietitians that are expert on these areas? Like, what's that process been like for you?
So everyone even listening, but even a lot of female athletes are now out speaking out about being pregnant and how they can still come back to sport. Look at Serena Williams. She had a baby and she's coming back.
Nike just posted this massive like campaign on it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome. And in the podcast, you mentioned a couple before this. I don't know when this released, but when you talked about the female cycle, like there's so much going on. There's a lot more research coming out on this, right? But anyways, I did not read the books. I did not look up journal articles. I hired a dietitian. One of the things we've all learned is that if you want to work with an expert, pay for it. Stop like saying that you're going to read the boards or read a book and never implement it. Right? We had someone hold us accountable, someone who showed up to calls and helped us get through baby-led weaning. So baby-led weaning is pretty much you cook the same foods you eat and allow your son or daughter to eat with you. So Amaya reaches for the food and grabs it. We put a spoon in front of her, but she actually reaches for the spoon and puts the spoon in her mouth to eat it. We don't guide the spoon in her mouth the old way, like using the airplane method. None of that. Like you let her choose, and she stops eating when she feels like it. So she'll stop like reaching for food and putting it in her mouth because she feels full. So the whole intuitive eating route, right? Like the purpose behind baby-led weaning is that studies show that they have better relationship with food. They have a better weight relationship and all these things because they're learning how to understand their hunger cues. Something probably none of us had an experience, but maybe we did. We just don't know. I know my mom said the first food I ate was cookies. So I guess I was destined to be a guy who likes cookies. But that baby-led weaning, I hired a dietitian. Caroline Weeks,
I was about to ask you.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So I hired her because we met her at a conference 2 years ago before the pandemic, and she was super awesome. And I believe it's her husband. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Caroline, but he's Venezuelan, so it was super awesome to have someone,
husband or boyfriend. Yeah, I remember that.
Boyfriend,
So it was awesome because what happened was that she was able to help us with some of the traditional foods we like. So Spanish food, so like plantains, right? We have arepas, which is not typical of Dominicans, but we know enough Venezuelans that we love arepas. So we made like spinach arepas for her to get some more iron in, right? So there are other dietitians that know way more about the space than me. And I said, why am I going to try to do this? I work with active individuals. I work with athletes. I never was into the baby. There's nothing wrong with it. Pediatrics is awesome. So I hired an expert. I didn't want to waste my time going through the books, trying to figure it out on my own. Like we've all been down that path and we know it sucks. When you know what you're doing, you have someone to guide you. That's the best way to do it. So I practiced what I preached. So I hired a dietitian, and it has been one of the best investments we've made because I feel confident. I feel comfortable, and I'm not worried about how Amaya's eating. And I know other people around my age group who also had kids who are now feeding them, let's say 3 times a day. We started with just 1 meal a day because it made it easy to transition, just like we all do with our clients. For those that do like a macro approach, you're not like, hey, you have to do rest days, you have to do refeeds, and you have to do active workout macros all at once, perfect week 1, right? We start small. I do the plate method. So I say, hey, we're going to follow this lean plate for maybe 2 meals this week. And that's what she did. She said, hey, just start including meals. Don't feel pressured. And when she hits 7 to 8 months, start doing 2 meals a day. When she's 9 to 12, then you can do 3 meals a day. And slowly but surely, she's weaning off the breast and going to food, right? But the breast is still, because we're doing breast milk exclusively. We also hired a lactation coach for that because we heard so many different things in the hospital that if we wouldn't have hired that lactation coach before going to that hospital, we probably would have given up and done formula. Nothing wrong with formula. Let me also state that. but we really, my wife really wanted to do breastfeeding. So again, we've hired experts because I'm not an expert in lactation coaching. I'm not an expert in pediatric nutrition, and I have no shame in saying that. I'd rather be completely honest and say where my faults are and tell you where my strengths are. But it's been an awesome experience. Highly recommend it.
That's cool, man.
Regardless of where you are in your journey, and I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
always
and
hiring an expert.
And I hear like all kinds of Dezi. What was that like for you then, like with Rory? Because I would love to
go. It was really similar. Because I kind of think back. I mean, I ended up doing a TED talk about it. I mean, around 3 months, like I hired a lactation consultant to help me with bottle feeding because it was horrible. So that kind of started our journey. But for me, with the baby-led weaning, we did the same thing. And a lot of it had to do with personal experience because I'm 13 years older than my younger siblings, 13 and 14 years old. So I fed them. So I saw them at the table with us all the time. And so when it came time to feed Rory, you know, Callie's the type of person that really likes to educate herself. So she was already in a bunch of breastfeeding support groups. So that transition from, you know, breast to food was fairly easy because for us, it was just the same thing, Tony. It was sitting down, getting her used to food, letting her play with it, making a huge mess, but it's all really part of the process. And so it's funny, Castillo, that you mentioned that she really loves steak. I mean, Rory really loves salmon and sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
That was the thing that she loved. My family was like, yo, you were raising the most bougie baby in the world. So it was really similar. I think as a parent, for me, the hardest thing was trusting that she could navigate her own reflexes, right? You know, there was a time that she tried avocado at a restaurant and had her first like coughing fit, and both Callie and I are like, oh my God, you know, no parent wants to ever do the damn Heimlich on a baby. But she was fine. And that, like, when I saw that moment, I was like, all right, she kind of knows her limitations. So let me go ahead and introduce her to different foods safely. And so it was really similar. I really love that you work with Caroline TC because she's amazing. She's amazing at what she does.
Cool, man.
Yeah, but I'm a huge fan. fan.
So what was some of the things, like, and then for you, Tony, that you learned as far as like what not to feed a baby or what to feed a baby, you know, that you were kind of surprised about?
So one of the biggest misconceptions that I think we all have heard of is never give baby fruit first because it's sweet and sugar and they're going to love sugar from there on out. Mm-hmm. And then Caroline asked, what's breast milk comprised of? Carbs, and it's sweet, it's sugar, it's natural. So that's a stupid thing to say because the breast milk is sweet. So having fruit first is not going to make them just crave sugar. We gave Amaya a banana and now she eats asparagus, she eats carrots. It's all like, that's just a stupid thing that we've just been taught. That's what society says. You can't give them fruit first because you got to give veggies first. So that was the first thing that I was like, oh, that's what I used to think too. The whole introducing food slowly. So allergens, she does say, like, make sure if you do have someone that has an allergen, to give yourself like feeding during the day, just in case you have to take them to the urgent care. So we save those for the weekend. So my mom has a shellfish allergy, so we gave her shrimp during the day to make sure if she did have a reaction, we knew to take her directly to the urgent care. So allergens are the only one she's like, you should introduce it, give it like 3 days rest and then go back in. But other foods, just go for it. Things that aren't typically allergic. And really just try to eat have her eat as much of the same foods you do. Don't try to make different things.
But you mentioned something earlier about salt and butter and some things that you guys cook differently. So why do you do that?
So because she's still developing her GI system and her kidneys and things like that, she can't process protein as well. She can't process salt as well. And Caroline said that because she actually works in the pediatric, I believe, at the Mayo Clinic. And those are some things she saw. So she always tells people, like, don't give them a lot of salty foods or things that are high in protein. So I'm not going to give her a piece of like a Kodiak cake or Greek yogurt. We actually bought like regular yogurt, whole milk, regular yogurt, not Greek, because that's just too much protein for her, at least at this moment. Thinking about things that are rich in iron, right? We know about it working with athletes and active individuals that they need to make sure they have enough iron because of foot strike. If there's someone who's a marathoner or even active individuals, they just have low iron stores. But I didn't think about that for my kid. So just teaching us how to include some iron-rich foods for her that, you know, like steak, right? So she likes steak, so that made it easy for us, or spinach. So those are just like some simple things I learned. And then the gag reflex, as Dezi said. So for kids, it's like the first third of their mouth is where they have the gag reflex when they're born. And up until a certain time, it starts to move back. So she puts a food in and she'll gag on it. And it's like, oh my God, is she choking? Is everything okay? But you kind of have to let them learn to spit it out. And it's really a scary moment, as Dezi said, to have that happen, because imagine if all of us are together and we eat something and we start like, we all would stop what we're doing and look at each other like, hey, what's going on with Tony? Why is he choking? Like
who's gonna do this?
I would hope someone would help, but maybe you guys leave me. They're like, he's not.
He's fine. It's fine.
He does this all the time.
Well, that's what we have to do with the baby, with the mice. It's like, it's fine. She'll get over it. Because it helps them learn, right? Like not to stick food like down their throat, not to have big bites. And it's a really cool experience. So just learning those little things has really opened my eyes to what eating and the pleasure of eating and what food is and how it really does bring us together as a family, right?
It's crazy that you could, because like I was just like one of our friends, like they're Gary and Carol, they live in Orlando. They just had baby Miranda just like literally like 2 weeks ago, and then but then they have Martin, and he's now, I think he's about to turn 4, I believe, or 3. He's a kid that he would just like because it's funny because like he sent me like a video of him the other day. He's like, hey, you want chocolate? I was like, no, I want an apple. And he's like, what? Exactly not like his dad, because like his dad is like, super like sweet tooth, like, fanatics. He's like, no, but I want an apple, or I could, I want like grapes or stuff like that. So like, I think, and he's a baby that was kind of like, they did that from 6 months on, just to kind of like let them experience and experiment foods and give them everything like salmon and broccoli, all these different things too, that he was, that you can enjoy. And then he craves those things now, which obviously is kind of like a pretty good point for because like I always like talk about GB, like she has a lot of like gut health issues, like terrible bloating, and she just literally just found out, because I the whole thing with like formula versus like breast milk. So when GB was born, her mom was only 18 years old, and she had to go to work immediately to be able to support her, because obviously her dad was never present. So that she just found out like literally less than a year ago that she was never breastfed, never, not even, wow. I think I barely, maybe in like for 3 days or so. So she was like fed formula since like almost like the first week that she was born. So, and then because of the fact that she kind of grew up in an environment where, she didn't really have access to a ton of different variety of foods too, like she was also kind of like spared from having a tons of higher protein items and things like that. So then it just kind of started to make me think like, perhaps like your bloating issues, your gut health issues are rooted in the way that you were fed when you were a child. And I think that it's like, it could be a possibility. We just found out she has a terrible allergy to, not an allergy that is like prophylactic type of allergy, but like that could cause some issues in her gut, which is to eggs. And she had no idea. She did like an Everly Well, one of those tests, and like it just kind of showed like ding, 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 the red, like all the way, like, she has a sensitivity to it. So then like it's a lot of those things that perhaps is how you're kind of like how you grew up eating those kinds of like foods, and how they kind of shape up your gut and all different things too. And then the environment too, in which you're kind of fed, because it's, again, and going back to, I think we have talked about this in the past, which is like, how many of you guys maybe like, grew up in a family where I was one of them, where you were not allowed to get out of the table or leave the table before your plate was like fully clean, or you can't have dessert until your plate is fully clean. I mean, I still deal with those kind of things, like, and that's like a normal, typical thing. It's kind of hardwired into our brains,
Yeah. It's all really important too, having worked very early on in my career in like the WIC setting. It's hard. And I actually have talked to Caroline about this, because she's really pro formula, and she's really like, hey, like, this is why it's really helpful, I think. And this is completely my experience, right? And so for those who chose to breastfeed or who chose to do formula, 100%, that's your parenting decision, and I support it. What I found very early on was that a lot of these women weren't getting the support and education to breastfeed, because a lot of times their family members were kind of scrutinizing them, like, oh my gosh, like, why are you breastfeeding? Can you go in the other room? They didn't get supported. And one of the things that I really valued about my wife is like, she really dove into support groups where it like breastfeeding was just normalized. Like, that's what you did. And if we look at like the amount of nutrition, natural nutrition, antibodies, things like that, especially as people are getting vaccinated. I mean, a lot of people that I'm around in social circles that are still breastfeeding are still doing that because it's the most natural source. And so it's hard as you kind of go down the line, because we're talking about like treats. Rory's 5. I'm still trying to figure out where I stand on like there. And she's gamey too. There's times she'll finish half her dinner and she's like, Dad, I'm full. I'm like, okay, why don't you check in with your stomach? Why don't you take a drink of water? Let's check in again. Yeah, I'm full. Dad, can I have chocolate? And I'm like, damn it.
Are you really?
Like, yeah, because I'm still trying.
Yeah,
exactly. So I'm still trying to figure that out, because like I don't have a sweet tooth. Like I'm good. I'm more savory, but my wife is total sweet tooth. So we were talking about this the other day. Like, how do we want to interact with this? And I was telling her, I was like, listen, I'm perfectly okay with her having like sweets or desserts afterwards. If it's a connecting moment between the two of you and you two connect on it, and that's what she attributes it to, like, I'm fine with that. I have an issue at times just in my own parenting where she does stuff like that, where I really want her to sit down and eat with her family. And then we can talk about desserts later. So we try to break it up a little, but dude, parenting and feeding is hard. We're experts, right? It's still hard.
Yeah, this is just me trying to kind of get all like the ins and outs, like in a podcast type of environment. So when I'm prepared, whenever I have my first child,
dude,
there's nothing.
It's wild.
There's nothing, dude. I wish I could tell you this would prep you, but this probably won't. This will be a drop in the bucket.
No, but I think it's important, like the whole thing of like, you know, making sure that you're working with somebody that understands this. Like, you know, my goddaughter, she lives in Argentina. Her name is Mila, and they just found out she has a pretty bad allergy. So I started to thinking and looking into possibly somebody that could help her, because she has some pretty bad protein allergies. And then so we had to kind of like figure something out. So like he asked me like, hey, can you recommend anybody? So send it over to like somebody that is like more into pediatric, like, very like baby infant nutrition. So that can actually kind of support that, because again, like it's like an area that I'm like, yeah, I can't just say anything on this, because it's not my area of expertise, so but that's kind of crazy. And I think also with the whole baby and how they're fed from the beginning, I know there's an emotional component. I think that's also kind of like important, because I did this morning.
Oxytocin's a beautiful thing, man.
Yeah. Is it what?
Oxytocin is a beautiful thing, man.
Explain that, dude.
It's like the love hormone, right? And so like what they tell us, and this is, I actually, TC and I talked about this when his little girl was first born. I was like, dude, skin to skin. Cause that's like the only way that fathers at first can really
I just
bond
heard about this, like in just like this, like with my friend Gabriel just had her girl, like his girl, like they talk about skin, and I never heard of that before. Yeah.
It's crazy, man. Cause I remember when Rory was first born, like anytime that Callie went to the bathroom or something, like shirt is off, like skin to skin. And like, that's how I bonded with her the first year, because I mean, I don't know how you feel with the Maya, but like men don't exist for the first year. Like you're just trying to like help out. Like, right?
Absolutely.
They don't really bond with you. I got told a long time ago, like kids don't really bond with you until year 1, maybe. And then that's when like that happens. So for that year, like it was just about skin to skin. But to go back to oxytocin, I mean, that's the hormone that gets released when they're on the breast, when they're together. And I can't tell you how many times that I sort of saw it, and it was a really beautiful thing. And I really think as a culture that we need to normalize that, because it's the most natural form of bonding. I mean, that's what that is. And so it's been really interesting to see that. And now that, because my wife breastfed Rory up until about 4 years, and that's just something that the two of them chose to do. And when they both kind of weaned off of each other, it was kind of like a huge grieving process for the two of them, man. So it's such a cool bonding tool that if people don't have support out there, go get that support, go get into groups. Right now with COVID and everything, like it's probably hard to do that in person, which Zoom might not be the best thing, but get yourself a good support system and people that know what they're talking about to help facilitate that really, really important relationship.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've heard about some of those things, and kind of like that emotional connection that kind of exists at the very beginning of birth and having a baby and all that. That it's but obviously kind of like more of like an experience type of thing. So but that's cool. Yeah, and also like thinking too, like of how people kind of like of how kids typically evolve into the way they start to see food more like from the emotional standpoint too, as they kind of grow up. Because I was just kind of recording a
100%.
like a live video today talking about like breaking the barriers of emotional eating and really what kind of like leads to that. And it's interesting because some of like the research and articles I was kind of reading through is like there's like 3 different types of emotional eating, like anxiety eating, sad eating, and anger eating, or those like different kind of things, and they're all typically rooted to childhood, which are going to be like, sadness is like, if you're sad or like whatever, like how do you calm a kid down? Like by giving him sweets or giving him something that, and a lot of parents typically do that. Or how do you actually calm a kid that is like mad and like panicking and stuff like that? A lot of parents would opt to kind of give them food or to take him to McDonald's or to take him to like, things like that to be able to kind of calm them down. And now obviously those things kind of trickle down into adulthood, and then like you're still kind of like there's a lot of things that come from like your childhood that are still, you're still like kind of like a kid inside, and then you use the same kind of like coping mechanisms to soothe yourself based on the emotions that you're kind of feeling. So it was really interesting to be able to kind of see that it's just, there's typical type of emotional like triggers that typically are related to food, where you use food as a way to kind of like calm yourself down, or to just kind of like, get yourself to be in a different place. I'm sure obviously happy emotional eating too is another big thing, but this is more in the relationship with what typically happens to most people, and it usually falls into those 3 emotions.
Yeah, what I'm finding too, just having done a whole lot of eating disorder work, is that a lot of it's based off of trauma too, which is a whole nother beast in itself that a whole medical team needs to be a part of, because it's crazy how oftentimes that food can become this safety or this control when things outside of their world is completely chaotic. It's crazy how food can become like someone's confidant, or like that thing that they can really trust when they don't feel safe in the world. So it's multi-layered, man. It's really important to continue to talk about. And what I tend to find in most cases, that if people can acquire the skills and the safety to be able to tell their story more, they release that shame. And that's where a lot of the healing can happen, because we've all had this, right? We've had clients who step in and you're trying to further understand like their behaviors. And then you get stories like what people tell us. And it's like, oh, hey, like this makes a lot of sense. Let me just provide some feedback. Does this make sense to you? And when it does, and that light bulb turns on, they start to be in a place of learning rather than constantly shaming themselves in secrecy. So it's all multi-layered, man. It's really important to continue to talk about.
Yeah. There's I think GB's reading a book right now. I got it a long time ago, but I haven't really kind of dived super in detail on it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, dude.
And it's and it's actually talks about like the past trauma and how it affects you sometimes in ways that you can't really comprehend internally. So for example, it talks a lot about people with PTSD. And people with PTSD, like there's a lot of like kind of stress responses that are kind of happening inside of your brain. They're being triggered without you even knowing it. They are causing some of the changes metabolically and like in your brain specific kind of like areas that you have no idea that they're happening, but they're still happening, and they're obviously affecting the way that you make decisions, the way that you actually eat, and the way also that your body uses those fuels, which is, to me, it's kind of like mind-blowing. So I think, again, like your past really defines like so many different things in nutrition and health and those different things, areas that like sometimes like even from when they're babies. Now that we kind of started like, how this conversation like started here today, that a lot of times like we don't necessarily think about. And then those are the things that, people come here like, oh yeah, I'm like trying to like, want to lose weight, or I want to like accomplish this. I was like, okay, like let's just kind of like go back to really to like, I had a call the other day, and like my client was just like super weirded out by the fact that I was asking him about his childhood. Because like, I'm asking you this information because we really need to kind of get to the bottom of things, as far as like why you actually kind of binge at night, or why do you typically kind of have this typical type of routines or habits that right now you are struggling with, because otherwise we're just using kind of band-aids instead of trying to kind of get to the root cause. So they're deeper things sometimes,
Yeah,
so
it is, man.
And
it's funny.
Go ahead, Dezi.
Go ahead.
Tony, it's up to you, bro.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Andres, because I'm currently working with someone who is transitioning off of keto. And I know this is taking like a whole different approach, but like they have like an emotional eating with carbs, right? I'm telling them that they can introduce carbs. We want to introduce it slowly. We don't want to just all at once. But for them, they're like, after our first call, I was like, hey, it's okay for you to have rice. They're like, what? Like right after this call, I'm like, yeah, you can have rice. Nothing's going to happen. And they're like, oh my God. But then like when we got on the call the next week, he's like, man, I only had rice like twice because in my head, I just don't feel like I can be successful eating carbs, right? So you, someone who has done keto, you did it for a year and you now back to eating carbs. It might not have been emotional for you, but it's definitely emotional for him. So it's kind of thinking like when people jump on these diets to hit their weight loss goal or maybe their muscle gain goal, whatever that is, how can we as practitioners help them break that up? Like you're saying, you're having a conversation with your client about childhood. And not only that, it sounded like he was a male client. So a guy to guy opening up, dude, that's super difficult.
Yeah. It's
right.
Tough.
Typically when it's like a guy to a female will open up to the guy as long as she trusts the guy, which is what we do with coaches with our female clients. But when it's a guy to guy, it's almost like pulling nails at certain points. They're like, whoa, why are you asking me that, dude? Like they kind of get like a bit defensive. Eventually they open up. But at first it was, yeah,
it's tough. And the reality and the answer to that is like, it really like depends on the person, but it also comes down, like I have, I struggle with this a lot with dudes more so than females, because again, like it's usually like a lack, it's not necessarily a lack of trust. It's like, this is the way that I have worked for me. And this is the way that I have done it, myself. And like, I pride myself on doing that this way, but it's always like, yeah, but then you wouldn't be here. Obviously that would have been effective, but it really takes, it's easier said than done. And I have worked with clients who for 3 months into the program, they're still cut out the carbs, even though I'm telling them that, hey, you shouldn't do this.
It's crazy.
Because like they're not giving themselves permission to experience something different. And because they're just so afraid of kind of going back to old ways. And then the reality is that sometimes the answer to this is they have to see it for themselves. And they have to kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, like I'm eating, and I help them see that once they kind of go through the process. And I said, okay, like, so let's just kind of like recap here. So it's been 3 months. You started off, like consuming almost like, bunch of fat. So 120 grams of fat, 150 grams of fat. And now you're actually down to 70. So like you cut down your fat in half and you triple the amount of carbohydrate consumption that you're having. Have you noticed that? Like now how you're actually like crushing like 200 plus grams of carbs, when in reality before you started at 60 or 70. And they're like, wow, yeah. And what's happened to your body, man? Like, look at this kind of photos, look at this kind of changes. Like, what does this tell you? And I'm like, wow, yeah, you're totally right. And it's like, not only this, but then usually like a lot of these guys, and also this applies to females that do like the carb restriction and all these different things like that. They're not truly restricting carbs. Yes, they are. But at the same time, like they're not really kind of telling you about the one time that they went and hang out with their buddies and then they actually kind of crushed like, 10 beers and then went out to eat, like to have whatever they had that had a ton of carbs. And then I have the pleasure to working with people that will tell me like, actually, that's exactly what happened throughout Christmas. So it's like this, like that keto, like on and off. And that's why, when I kind of work with people that are on it and they're like, they swear about it, they love it. And it's like, do you like it in this way, or do you just do it mostly because this is the way that leads to that change? And most of the time the answer is always going to be like, it's just because it's really what helped me. So if you could go back to eating carbohydrates and get the same change and the same result and feeling the same way, like, would you be open to that? And they're like, yes, of course. At the same time, I have people that absolutely love to eat that way. So it really depends, man. But I think they have to see they have to see it for themselves before they can actually fully like commit to it. But then the way I do it is I don't ever kind of start with like starches, because sometimes it's like, it's a bit too, it's harder for them, like rice and all that. So I would start for something like, dude, let's just kind of maybe add a little bit of like like fruit, like berries and like apples and things like that. And then we kind of slowly start to add, okay, like, cool, let's maybe switch now. Let's start adding maybe some sweet potatoes or so. Okay, cool. Cool. How you feel about this? Great, man. Like I feel good. All those different things. Like, okay, like, are you ready to maybe kind of go into more different things? Cool.
Yeah.
Like, let's add some grains. Let's add some rice and all those different things like that. And before you know it, the guy's eating donuts and like adding yeah. And like, that's usually the way it's always been. But then when they understand that it's the calorie like deficit and restriction that helped him actually lose the weight, then they're like, oh, like that makes sense. So for him, for one of these really successful, one of my clients right now, currently working with him, now he's traveling. So for work, and that was some of the biggest issues for him, because like he would order a burger, take out like burn bun, all those different things like that. But then he would just come ravishing back home on a Friday, and then he would just lose his shit. So that's some of the things that completely changed, because now there's not that massive restriction that was created at the beginning on that. So that's like the key there for to kind of get people to switch the chip, but at the same time, it's not like an overnight thing for many people. So
and that just kind of goes all in all, like emotional eating, what happened in their childhood. And we didn't go down that route, but that even transitioning off keto is like, how do you transition off of a fad diet into approaches we all teach? How do you transition off working with and I spoke to someone about this. They worked with, I forget the name of the company, but something against gravity. And I was like, I have no clue what.
WAG. It's like, it's like a macro space, like, type of company. Yeah. But it's just very specific. It's like, okay, like, you didn't lose weight. Okay, let's lower your numbers. Okay, you gain weight, like, or like, oh, you're losing weight. Let's keep it the same. It's not like, well, let's figure out exactly how you're organizing yourself. So it's just more like, macro coaching, where like they're just adjusting numbers for you based on your progression, not necessarily really truly coaching you onto those things. So just very like numbers driven.
And what I was getting to is they had someone, the person I spoke to, they were doing this. They were on a calorie deficit for 2 years in a row. They went to go visit a different country, and they were so worried about the food they were putting in and how they track it versus like enjoying the moment. So think of like the emotional things that they've missed out on, plus the emotional triggers they must have had earlier in life because they wanted to be this way and not having the right education on it. So it's just a lot for people to unpack. Right. It's never just a one-time incident for most people.
Yeah. And it's not always also rooted in childhood. Sometimes it actually can be developed like, in adult years as a result of doing those different things for a long time. So absolutely. It's key things, man. Cool. Well, we covered most of the hour, guys. So that's a pretty good, unraveling conversation. This is a true chit chat series for sure. So
yeah,
I love it.
Cool. Well, happy to kind of have you guys in here. Any kind of like last minute thoughts? Dezi, you were saved, man. Like I did not actually kind of give you crap about the fact that you're not coming to my wedding happening. This is actually releasing 1 week exactly, like right before my wedding. But we couldn't really finish this episode without kind of saying that Dezi turned out my invitation to join.
Giving him a shout out.
One of the most important like days of my life, and I actually chose very select amount of people to invite them, and he turned me down. So it's something that I will always remember.
How mad would you be if I just showed up?
Oh man, you're gonna do that live right now? The recording? We're talking about this. Okay, that was a pretty good strategy.
How mad would you be if I just showed up? Like,
hey,
for real,
worries,
if I showed up during Hora Loca.
We're just gonna have like, a little after party. You can just like, you can be a wedding crasher, and then
just don't eat anything. Don't drink anything.
I won't.
Yeah. Bring your own water. Hydrate or
bring your own water.
I love you, buddy. No. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you, dude. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's all fun and games. It's all good. We're just like having fun with you.
The only thing I can just leave off is when Alyssa at the end of it, when you were going into like a serious moment about how you can transition off, she came in and Amaya literally shit all over her dress. So she just came in and is like laughing, and I'm like, right now we're
welcome to parenthood,
baby. So that's what I can tell you about.
Go ahead and go change some. Go ahead and go change some clothes and some diapers, man. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank you again for being here for the Chit Chat series. We'll do it again. At least we're gonna try to do this once a month, guys, for the people listening in. And of course, as always, thank you for being avid listeners. And if you have any questions for any of us, you guys know where to find us. In the show notes, you're gonna be able to find the links directly to our social media channels, just to make sure that you can actually join in and join the conversation. So. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you, Dezi. Thank you, Tony. We'll see you guys in the next one.